Welcome to the Peep Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Maroc, and on this episode, we reconnect with John Kruth, Executive Director of the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina. But before I get started, I want to ask a huge favor. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word about it. I'm so grateful that you're listening and giving me and researchers like John the chance to share our enthusiasm about how scientists and researchers are studying the paranormal. So many people don't realize that there's serious science happening, and it's up to us to spread the word. The more parapsychology and paranormal studies are taken seriously, the more the people who experience everyday paranormal events will feel comfortable talking about it. It really is more normal than most people think. Okay, now that that's out of the way, back to the intro. John Kruth was the first guest of the Peep Podcast on episode 1 when he told us about the history of the Rhine and the variety of parapsychological subjects studied there. He was kind enough to return for episode 3 to talk about how people's emotions can influence the technology around us, and he described his research into that topic. Now he's back to discuss one of my favorite topics, biophotons and bioenergy. I encourage you to listen to episodes 1 and 3, but it's not a necessary prerequisite for today's conversation. In case you haven't, though, here's a little more information about John. John is the Executive Director of the Rhine Research Center and the Founder and Education Director of the Rhine Education Center. His 20-plus years of professional technology experience and 10-plus years as a professional researcher provide a unique insight into the integration of technology and parapsychological research. His research includes explorations into subtle energies of the body, including psychic healing, the energy behind psychokinesis, poltergeist activity, and other unconscious effects on electronic devices, and measurements of biophotons, ultraviolet light from energy healers, which is tonight's topic. He has numerous publications and has spoken at professional conferences and other forums regarding scientific parapsychology, the history of the Rhine, the nature of energy healing, poltergeist, and other topics related to parapsychology and the paranormal. Besides his research, John's current projects include the development of a community of psi experiencers at the Rhine and worldwide through the use of technology to provide online courses, broadcasts of parapsychological speakers and events, and the development of online resources for scientists and those who are looking for reliable and professional information about scientific parapsychology. Let's dive in with John. Hi, John. Welcome back to the Peep Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Always good to see you, Nikki.
Good to see you too. I'm really grateful that you were willing to come back after already doing 2 episodes with me and talk about a completely different subject. And I'm really excited about this topic. I have been to a Rhine talk. I don't remember what year it was, but it was several years ago now, with Ed Edwards, who is, I don't know how you would describe him, an energy healer and PK.
He discusses himself as someone who manipulates energy, and he uses it for healing purposes.
Okay.
And Ed's done a lot of work in our labs. That's why we did this talk with him a few years ago.
Yeah. And that's what I was thinking about when I decided to see if you were willing to come back and join me one more time. So the conversation today is about biophotons and bioenergy and how that is connected potentially to PK and healing and how you're actually able to study these things in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited.
Yes, I could talk about those things for hours. Um, but I think when we're talking about these things, a lot of people wonder, what is this biophoton, bioenergy, and
Mhm.
human biofield? This is the
Yeah.
terms that people are using a lot, is the human biofield. So are you familiar with that term, or do you have an idea what you think it is?
I have an idea of what it is, but if you want to give us the definitions, I think you'd do a much better job than I would.
Well, I'll tell you where I got originally interested in this and started looking at the human biofield is, people often talk about auras, and they talk about light energy that's around the body and being able to see light and colors around the body. And oftentimes people discuss being able to diagnose health and illnesses from the appearance of the aura and the colors in the aura. Well, this always fascinated me. And I read something with Edgar Cayce when I was younger, where Edgar Cayce said he could see auras. And he oftentimes would discuss being able to do diagnosis with it. But he also talked about one time he was in a building, he went to get on an elevator, and he stopped himself and said, I'm not going to get on that elevator. And he didn't, and the elevator actually had a problem, and everyone in the elevator died because the elevator fell.
Wow.
And later he reflected on it and said what he had noticed is that none of the people in the elevator had an aura. So
Oh,
this was a really interesting story, and it made me think, wow, if you can actually see things like this would be very interesting. So I started to look into a little bit more about what this aura was and try to understand the biofield. And that led me to looking at some Eastern medicine techniques where they talk about uh, chakras,
hmm.
they talk about chi, they talk about prana. Oftentimes in Chinese medicine, they have these things called meridians that run through the body, where they say the chi runs through the body. These are acupuncture points and acupuncture channels where they say that chi runs through the body. And as I started learning more about that, I said, is this the same as an aura? Are they any of these things similar? And how do they relate to health and healing? Because I've always had an interest in energy healing. Well, when I got to the Rhine a few years ago, I was walking around the labs trying to get familiar, and there was one room that was always closed, and I didn't understand why it was closed all the time. And I asked Sally Reinfeather, who was the director at the time, why is this room always closed? And she goes, oh, that's where the bioenergy lab is, and no one's been using it for a while. And I said, what's the bioenergy lab? And she said, oh, Bill Joines, who is over at Duke University, he's an electrical engineering professor, he put this lab together, and they were doing it to research the energy coming from energy healers. And I said, well, that sounds real interesting. She says, why don't you go to get a hold of Bill and talk to him a little bit about it? So I called up Bill and I asked Bill, what's going on in the lab? How are you measuring energy? Well, Bill is an expert on light. He teaches light and photonics at Duke University. And so he's written textbooks on this. And so he was looking at light emissions from humans, but very, very low level light. It seems, Nikki, that all of us have this natural glow,
Yeah.
but it's in an ultraviolet range. It's in a range that we can't see visually. Well, heat is infrared. You'll see infrared light. That's heat coming off of people.
Hmm.
But ultraviolet is kind of in the blue range. And you don't see this. But if you put people in a really dark environment and use really sensitive equipment, you can start to see this light. About 50 years ago, there was a man named Fritz Popp over in Germany who decided to start looking at this light coming from organic matter. He was looking at fruit and vegetables that were grown organically and some that weren't grown organically to see if there was a difference in the light emissions from them. And he noticed a difference between them. And he named this different, he called these things biophotons. This name back in the 1970s, people were like, great, you're seeing more light coming from fruit and vegetables in some cases and not in others. Why does this matter to us?
Yeah.
And it really didn't catch on much into the scientific community. But over the 50 years since then, we've realized that everything that's organic produces this light. And this is no longer the realm of fringe science or parapsychology. It's now come into standard biology. Upper level biology is now studying biophotons, what they're calling ultra weak photon emissions as well. And they're looking at these coming from animals, from plants, even from single cells, and trying to see if the cells are producing these. They found that anything organic does produce these photons at different levels, but they don't know why. They don't know what they're for, and they don't know how they're being produced. So this is where it's progressed, and this is where my interest kind of started back way long ago with the aura, and now it's on to something that I can actually measure and see in a laboratory called biophotons.
That's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the biophoton lab work? Like, what exactly are you doing to measure these things?
Well, when we started, we were bringing in people who said they were energy healers. We didn't test them to see if they were healing people. They said they were healers, and people who did a lot of meditation. And we brought them into the lab, and we started to measure infrared light coming from them. We put them in this really, really dark environment. It's what we call a double dark room. The room is completely painted black. There's no reflective surfaces. We make sure people take off all of their earrings and jewelry and even their eyeglasses when they go in. And then we turn all the lights off, and it gets dark. People who depend on their glasses are often like, I don't want to take my glasses off. And I'm like, you're not going to see anyway. It's dark in there. So you might as well take them off. So we put them in this very dark environment, and we would have a very sensitive infrared light detector. And we were trying to measure how the infrared light responded when people were doing their healing. So what we do most of the time when we do this sort of experiment is we have them go in and we just say, okay, just relax for a little bit and don't do anything. Don't start your heal. Don't do anything. Just relax and let us get a baseline reading for the environment and see how the infrared light is in the room when you're in a relaxed state. And once we got a very good baseline, we then say, start your healing process. They start their healing and we look for changes. Well, when we were looking at the infrared light, almost immediately, as soon as we said, start your healing, we noticed that the healers, their hands, the palms of their hands, and their forehead started to turn red and started to get more and more bright red. Huh. Well, this is heat coming from these two areas. When you're talking about healing and all of a sudden you notice their hands and their forehead get hotter, you wonder, why is this happening? There's a lot of really traditional type of explanations. Increased blood flow, for example. Skin conductance could change and cause it to be warmer in those areas. There's a number of normal explanations, but the interesting thing is we didn't ask any of them to make their hands and their forehead warm. And it happened almost automatically for each of them. It happened so much that we just said, okay, now we know with the healers that their hands and foreheads get warm. Let's see if we can find another form of energy that besides heat coming from them. So we started looking for biophotons. We use this instrument called a photomultiplier tube, and it measures ultraviolet light. It's so sensitive, it will measure a single photon of ultraviolet light each half second.
Wow.
A single photon.
Wow.
When this room is empty, it's so dark in there that normally we get about 3 to 5 photons a second measured it from this machine. That's nothing.
That's
when there's no one in the room.
Okay.
Yeah. When there's nobody in the room, when the room is cool, when everything is cooled down, the equipment is in its best state. When we bring a person in, it doesn't matter who it is, and we have them sit in front of this photomultiplier tube. That number will go up to about 12 to 20 photons a second because we all glow in this range. All of us have this natural glow. But when I bring healers in and I have them sit in front of the machine and I have them relax for about 5 minutes and get a nice baseline, then I'll ask them, start your healing, and I look for changes. Most of them, I actually don't see any changes. I get pretty much a baseline. But with about 10% of them, I see a change where I start to see then numbers jump from about 12 to 20 up to 80, or even into the hundreds or thousands of photons a second. We have some that have gone into the hundreds of thousands even. It's rare, but we have some people who do really perform well in this environment. So we're seeing increased levels of light.
Wow.
Now, how this is coming from the people's body. So how is this related to what we were talking about earlier with this human biofield? Well, light is a form of electromagnetic energy.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing an increase in energy in the room when people are doing their healing activities. This is where we start to be able to try to see if we can correlate some of the readings we're getting with the activities of the people in the room. Now, we're progressing with this, and we've done this work now for about 12 years, and we've found quite a number of people who have been able to produce a dramatic number of photons and a lot of energy in the room while they're healing, and we see that it's obviously correlated to the healing activity. So this is what we're doing in the lab right now.
Okay. So when you say while they're healing, are they picking somebody that they want to heal at a distance and focusing on that person? Is that the way their process is working while you're measuring this?
It depends on the person. We have had times where we've had two people in the room, and we've had someone working with the healer working with the patient within the room. We've had times where the healer was working remotely, and we've also had times where the healer was just focusing their healing energies and trying to expand their energies. And in each case, we've seen increases in the light in the room. Like I said, it's not consistent. We have a lot of people who go in and we get no changes, but we do see some people who are very consistent and do it almost every time they're in the room, including Ed Edwards, who we were talking about earlier. He very consistently gets measurements in this room.
Now, I was watching a video last night of a talk that you gave several years ago, and you were talking about Ed and how consistent he can be. But then the question comes up, is he using PK to affect the technology in the room, or is he truly producing the biophotons? And since that video was from a few years ago, have you gotten any farther along with figuring that answer out?
Well, what we did is we had Ed in the room, and we were getting such high readings from him so consistently. It was so consistent, we could start to play with the procedures a little bit and the protocols. Mm-hmm. We weren't anymore determining, does it happen? We were trying to figure out why it happens. And one of the first things I started wondering, is it light, or could he be affecting the electronics directly? And so this photomultiplier tube, it's like a camera, and it has a little shutter on it that you open up and you let the light in. And of course, it's a dark room, so there's no light except for anything that's coming from a person here. But what we did is, while he was producing and showing a demonstrated effect, we closed the shutter and had him continue to try to produce photons. And we continued to see readings as if there was light getting into the photomultiplier tube.
Wow.
So this gave me a few different ideas here. Okay, what could be causing this? Obviously, it's not light coming from him. It can't penetrate through the shutter to get into the camera. So the question then became, well, could he be affecting the photomultiplier directly, the electronics within the photomultiplier, and causing them to act like there's light in there? Could he be affecting my computer that's in the other room, taking the readings? Or might he actually be producing light, but producing it inside of the photomultiplier, so it's not going through the shutter or around it, but actually it's inside of the photomultiplier tube? So this is where we've gotten to with the process, where we've determined there are some options and some alternatives. But to figure that out, it's a kind of tricky process that would involve a lot more equipment and a lot of duplication of methodology. For example, if I want to see if he's affecting my computer, I could have two computers hooked up and see if they both get affected. If I wanted to see if he was affecting the actual mechanism of the photomultiplier, I could have two or more photomultiplier tubes and see if they all get affected consistently. This way I can start to determine, is he affecting, well, I could get more information about whether he's affecting the tube directly, whether he's affecting the computer directly, or if he's producing light inside of one tube, is it going to be inside of the other tubes as well? It's a little more complex, and these aren't cheap pieces of equipment. So we don't have a lot of them just laying around and that we can work with like this.
This actually, I don't know if you know who Robert Bigelow is.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. For any listeners who don't, look him up. He is he's a billionaire with interest in the paranormal and parapsychology. It sounds like this would be something that you would he would be interested in, and if you could get in touch with him and be like, "Hey, can you fund this research? We're actually making progress." He'd be Mr. Moneybags for this one.
Well, when he listens to this podcast, I'm sure we'll be right on his list, right?
Right. I'll tag him on Twitter and see what happens.
No, he actually was associated with the Rhine quite a number of years ago.
Oh, really?
And provided some funding in the early 90s for the Rhine. But I have not met him, and I'm not in touch with him. But there are some private funders out there who are interested in these sorts of projects, and they are something that we could progress with. It does take a little bit of time and energy to make it happen, but it is one of the more interesting projects that we're doing there. When you talk about Ed and we talk about him affecting things in a lab, not just Ed, but there's other people who have also had effects in the lab and have been able to demonstrate consistent energy coming from their body in the form of this biophoton and this light energy. Mm-hmm. What we did also is we brought some people in who were demonstrating PK, psychokinesis. They were able to affect either electronics or cause objects to spin inside of a very closed, wheels to spin within a closed environment. Yeah. That wouldn't normally, there's no air getting in, there's no heat exchange going on, and they were able to cause it to spin. So these are people who were demonstrating psychokinesis in our laboratory. So, of course, what's my thought? Well, can you do it in my bioenergy lab? And if we can do it in a bioenergy lab, can we notice any change in the light readings then? We weren't able to find someone who was able to do it while they were in the bioenergy lab. Well, at least I couldn't tell if they were because it's dark in there and I couldn't see what they were affecting. But I was able to have them go into the same state and work from the same perspective that they would normally when they were trying to do PK. And I did see changes in light measurements in the room while they were in that state, in that meditative state that they used to go into PK as well. But it's not just PK, mm-hmm. Mind-matter interaction. It's not just healing. I've also had mediums, people who say they're communicating with spirits. Mm-hmm. And I've had them come into the lab as well and ask them to do whatever they do, whatever your specialty is, go ahead and do it. And I also saw some variation in the light when they were in the room, when they said they were communicating with spirits. So it seems that there is some sort of energy either being produced when people are going into these states, or that they're recruiting energy from the environment into the room whenever that's happening. Or it's also possible with the mediums that the spirits that they say they're communicating with may be a source of the light as well. These are all, there are so many interesting topics to study here all around the human biofield, because I guess the human biofield doesn't just stop when your heart stops beating.
Yeah.
It could continue on, which would be a form of survival research. And it could also help with people who are doing field investigations, trying to go into the field and look at paranormal phenomena in the field, except you have to be in a really dark environment for this stuff to be able to measure it.
Yeah, I could see how that would be difficult to create and control that kind of an environment in a so-called haunted house or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask if you had brought in maybe some, all I can think of is like holy people, like priests who just come in and pray. or ministers. I'm Catholic, I default to priest, but
Right.
um, ministers or monks, people who don't necessarily say they're communicating with spirits, but who come in and can get into a similar state through very focused prayer, very intentional prayer. Have you thought about doing that?
Um, it's not always easy to recruit people who are highly religious to come into parapsychology labs to do this type of work. Sometimes they have some resistance or objections even to the type of work we're doing. I'm not saying this is common, but it's I haven't run into anyone who is willing to take that step. But I have had martial artists, people
Okay.
who do a great deal of meditation and who develop a spiritual life and who work with what they call chi, life force energy. And in a similar way to the way that holy people, priests or ministers might utilize their intention to make requests or call upon the world to try to help people. In the same way, these chi masters utilize their chi energy and their intentions in a similar type of way. What was very interesting is when I brought chi masters in to do their martial arts forms, I did see some variation in light measurements, but it was very different than what I saw whenever I was working with healers. What I saw with the chi masters is that I didn't get as large readings. I wasn't getting readings into the hundreds or thousands of photons a second, but I was getting readings that would rise to a very significant level, and it would maintain for about 10 to 12 seconds and then come back down. So it was an increase in energy that was held for a period of time, and then it reduced again. Now, the way I interpret this is that these are type of people who have stronger strength of concentration. They're able to maintain their focus for a longer period of time. And because of this, they're able to bring the energy up and maintain it and then allow it to come back down, as opposed to someone who might be trying to push energy at another person for healing purposes, and who might be more like throwing lightning strikes at them or something, or
Yeah.
causing their nerves to twitch. They're very different type of behaviors. I did have an interest a couple years ago to try, besides people who do healing, people who do PK, mediumship, martial artists, I think we know that biophotons everybody produces them.
Yeah.
And it's normal. So my question was, when people are doing their normal activities, things that they really excel in, things they really want to do, the passions in their lives, are they producing more biophotons when they're doing these things? So, for example, musicians, when they're performing, athletes, when they're playing games or being part of a exercise, even people who are doing mathematics and very high level mathematics, when they get into their zone, when they get into their passion, does that passion mean there's more photons? Well, we haven't been able to pull together that research study yet to try to get people to come in for that purpose. But it's where I'd like to go with this next, because it is something that's normal for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
All of us produce these energies. All of us, what are healers doing that's different from someone who's a musician who's performing on stage? What's the difference here, and how can we learn more about it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine it would be harder with musicians unless you were just focusing on singers, because you'd have to have an instrument there and some reflectivity, and that would make it difficult to be as dark as you want it to be. And then I could really imagine it would be difficult for, athletes who are used to team sports and that sort of thing. Like, how would you get them to act in the way they would normally act in an environment that's so different from what they're used to?
Right, but you can use visualization techniques though.
Okay.
And people get, especially athletes and musicians, they get very good at visualization techniques. And they're able to simulate for themselves like they're in the situation, they'd be in a game or they'd be performing in front of an audience. And so perhaps we can do something similar to that to see if it has an effect. And what are the healers doing? they're stimulating their visualization sometimes, their imagination, trying to send energy, trying to produce different effects. So it could be very similar.
Yeah. And from what I've learned over the years, I don't know, but I've learned or heard visualization is very important for energy work because it is a way of focusing that intention. So yeah, I could see how that would work.
Yeah, and you know what? The other thing that's interesting to me as I've been studying different types of healing processes and different ways people work with healing, not everyone uses visualization. In fact, not everyone can visualize at all. There's some people who cannot visualize. And I did not know this before, but I realized that you have to teach certain people to visualize in order to go through this process. I did a study a couple years ago where we were looking at developing visualization skills and developing some meditation skills and seeing how that affects different psi activities. And starting from scratch with someone who's never done visualization before was a brand new topic for me. I'd never thought of that. But we all have different ways of perceiving the world and of working within the world. So
Yeah.
So some of the more recent stuff we're doing is related to trying to look at people who have produced biophotons in a lab, who have been expressing their bioenergy, and pairing that up with physiological readings. Things like if you're talking again about the human biofield, your body is an electrical system.
Mm-hmm.
There's electricity running through your system. Your heart produces electricity. Your brain produces electricity. All your nerves produce, and all of these things, when they produce electricity, also produce magnetic fields, because anytime there's an electrical current, you have a magnetic field.
Yeah.
So when we can measure electrical current if we're very close to the body. If we put very sensitive sensors on the body, you can measure the heart rate, and you can measure how the heart is beating, the electrical signals. You can measure from the brain. You can measure what people call brain waves, but we call EEGs, or electroencephalograms, where you can measure the electrical signals in the brain and where they might be more active than other times. So we're now working on a process where we're trying to measure the different energy points in the body, look at magnetism around the body, looking at skin conductance, on the electrical impulses on the skin, and looking at all of these and correlating that with light measurements in the bioenergy lab to see how are these biophotons being produced? Where are they coming from? When does your heart rate go up whenever that happens? Is there something that goes on related to your brain waves when this happens? Mm-hmm. Is there some other physiological measurements that we can pair with the biophoton production? This could really help us to understand a little bit more about what it is, and it may help us to understand how people are able to do things like healing. Because if I'm able to measure these physiological measurements from a healer and also measure it from a patient at the same time, we might see correlations between them. And if we start to see correlations, we can start to understand a little bit more about how the healing is working.
That makes sense. So you are currently doing this study right now?
This research will be starting this summer. Okay. Yes, there's a group in Portugal called the Bial Foundation, and it's a drug company in Portugal, and they've give out funding for neuroscience and for parapsychology, and they've provided a grant to help us to study this at the Rhine.
That's very cool. Do you need volunteers? Are you looking for, or do you already have people lined up?
When I do, I'll be sending out a call and letting people know.
Okay.
Right now, I'm setting up the equipment and getting things in place, so it wouldn't be until probably later in the year before anything would happen.
Okay. Yeah, definitely let me know and I'll put the word out.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. That'd be great.
And if I think I qualify, I'll volunteer.
Of course.
I love being a guinea pig for the Rhine. It's always
we
fun.
often have activities like that available.
Yeah. Very cool. Did you have anything else that you wanted to discuss? Any upcoming classes people could be taking or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. The Rhine Education Center we've been running for 10 years now, and we offer online courses for people who are interested in the science of parapsychology, who are not, there are a lot of people out there who who say they're going to teach you to be psychic and give you different methods to do it. But what we actually teach is how we study people who are having these experiences. And there are some techniques that you can learn that we've learned from our studies that can help you to develop your own skills. But we offer classes once a quarter. And this quarter coming up, so starting at the end of April, beginning of May, we're offering 4 courses. One is the Introduction to Parapsychology course. This is a foundational course for all of the classes that we offer at the Rhine. We also have another class called Human Consciousness and Survival Studies. You can learn more about how we study survival. And when I'm talking about survival, I'm talking about near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, reincarnation, and of course, spirits, whether it be apparitions or hauntings, and look at these different aspects and determine how that relates to the survival of consciousness. So that course, Human Consciousness and Survival Studies. The third course is a research methods course. So if you're really interested in the science, it's a course to learn how to develop your own research project. And it goes through a lot of the technical aspects and leads you to finally develop your own project. And finally, we have a course that talks about the development of integrative methods. It goes through the history of investigative techniques. Everything from back in the 19th century, whenever they were studying spirits and mediums and going into people's houses, to as we move forward, going into more controlled techniques, things that Houdini was doing, things that Hans Holzer was doing, that some of these famous ghost hunters and some people who were looking to try to debunk ghost hunters, and then finally up to more modern techniques that are being used. So it's kind of leads you through the field. These courses, one of the things we try to do, Nicole, is we try to keep them reasonable, and we make them accessible to people who are working. So you can watch them live, or you can watch the recordings of them. And they're really fun. You meet a lot of fun students in these classes. And we do this, like I said, every quarter. So people can look at the website. It's rhineedu.org.
Okay.
And that will give them all the information about the education center.
Okay. And I will link to that in the show notes. So if anyone is listening to this podcast, they can look at their phone or tablet or whatever they're listening on and just click on that link and go straight to the site.
Great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me again. I'll give you a little break before I call you back, because I know there's always something interesting going on at the Rhine. So obviously I'm always going to be interested in what's going on at the Rhine. So anytime you have news to share with the listeners, I'm happy to pass those along. And yeah, just thanks again for coming back for a third episode with me.
I'm always happy to do this with you. And, I just talked about this area. It's an area that has been one of my main areas of interest for a long time, but we have other research projects going on too. We'll catch up with those another time though.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Thanks, Nicole. It's great to see you again.
You too. Once again, I'm grateful to John for taking the time to talk with me about his research into biophotons from energy healers. If you want more information about the Rhine Research Center and the Rhine Education Center, the links are in the show notes. And thanks, as always, to you for listening. If you have an idea for a show topic, you can fill out the contact form at peeppodcast.com. That's P-E-E-P podcast.com. Remember, that stands for People Experiencing Everyday Paranormal. If I can find a study about it, I'll be happy to use it. Also, if you're interested in sharing your own personal stories of paranormal experiences, I'd love to have you on the show. It can be as anonymous as you'd like. You can keep up with the show on its Facebook page, facebook.com/peeppodcast. We also have a growing group linked from that page in case you're interested in joining the conversation over there. If you like the podcast, please give it some rating love on your favorite podcast app. Share it with friends and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Doing so will also help the podcast be found by others. If you're interested in supporting the show financially, I've set up a Patreon page at patreon.com/Nicole Maroc. Patrons will receive special thanks and some para-nerd perks. You can also look for the Peep Podcast shop at tpublic.com for t-shirts and other merchandise. I say it every week because I mean it. No matter how you support the show, listening, telling others about it, Patreon, or sporting a t-shirt, I really just appreciate you being here. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe and be well.